today's episode, we have Dan Thompson, who is a wealth manager. He specializes in helping you grow your money to get time freedom, location freedom, financial freedom. He's going to give you some of the best advice in this episode, which will help you get to exactly where you want to be over the next few years and at the end of your life. So make sure you have a pen and paper. There's loads of actionable things you can take out of this episode. We also talk about some of the benefits of living in Dubai versus the UK and some harsh realities a lot of people aren't living up to. Now let's get into the episode. So Dan, a lot of our audience are going to be potentially younger trainers, people with like online businesses. At what point do you feel people should go into starting to focus on generating wealth, not just income?
Yeah, that's a really tough one because it depends on what business people are running, right? And also, I think depending on the risk or the industry, it might dictate when someone starts kind of taking money off the table. Because say they've got so I know some people, for example, who work in e-com and they might be, for example, running a brand that probably has a longevity of like 2 years, 3 years, and like we're making the most out of this, and then we need to either find another business or do something else. So in that case, they might decide to kind of start taking money off the table and go into other assets and doing other things like sooner. If you had a more, I don't know if I'd call it more conservative business or something that had a longer runway, you know, you think it's going to be around for the next 15, 20 years, it might mean that they'd be, I suppose, more heavily investing in that business in the here and now and not be too concerned about taking money off the table and building assets. So it's a really tough question to answer that.
Do you think there's a certain point where people have a certain amount of capital they should start to look to invest? Because, for example, like we help a lot of people scale online businesses and they ask me like, oh, I've got some money in the bank, like what should I invest in? And my general opinion, the first question is like, how much? Because if you've got like $5,000 in the bank, like you probably should just keep that there, and because you kind of need to run your business. If you've got like 200, then cool, like it's kind of worth a conversation.
Yeah, I think that, again, like it's so specific to an individual, but I think broadly speaking, you know, if someone doesn't have a lot of liquidity and like you said, they've got 5K in the bank, right, they probably should keep hold of that, keep it in cash and just focus on building the business. So like, for example, like if you're a coach, you know, reinvesting in your marketing, your brand is probably the best option for you. When you're generating a larger amount of revenue, and this is different for different people, because if you're onto a really good thing, right, in your industry, it might be best to double down and put everything you've got, every pound you've got into your current business, right? And that might be marketing or scaling it through systems, whatever it may be, right? But then I think you hit a certain point where you've got to step back and think, right, you know, I've got all my eggs in one basket here, and there's got to be a tipping point where that return isn't worth the risk of having all their money in that one thing. And that's when they should really start kind of viewing it as different like pockets. So start taking money, so to speak, off the table and putting it into other businesses, other assets that are going to provide them some security for the longer term, you know.
So you run a business as a wealth manager. What specifically would be the first step someone should look to in terms of say for example, they have let's use an example. Say they've got a business that makes 30K a month. They've got £15,000 a month of profit coming through. Yeah. What would you advise to a client or someone in that type of position? And let's say they're 25 years old.
Yeah. So the first thing is, again, like put my kind of wealth manager cap on for a second, right? Is I'd have to really understand their circumstances, goals, all that sort of stuff to really give them an idea of how they distribute that profit, because it is like putting it into different pockets, right? So depending on what they're trying to achieve, you know, I might say, you know, retain some of it, reinvest in your business. Some of it you can do X, Y, Z with, for example, set up an equity portfolio, which is going to start banking the money. So if this doesn't work out in the future, you know, you're potentially going to have to live off this if you build it up to a high enough value. Realistically, using that example, you know, everyone should start somewhere and just get started. So the guy who's...
People listening to this, what's an equity portfolio?
Some people great question, sorry. So I shouldn't be using terminology. So simply speaking, a portfolio is just a collection of investments. And generally speaking in the world, you know, that could be anything. With us, you know, an equity portfolio, broadly speaking, is circa kind of 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 companies all over the world in different industries and sectors. So it's just them collected together, typically in a fund. So a fund is just a company that invests in loads of other companies. And a portfolio is a collection of all those funds. So basically it's just a range of stocks and shares is the simple answer. So if someone is generating a really good level of profit in their business, you know, putting some of that profit into a kind of selection of shares, ideally thousands, well diversified, and in the best possible sense, have it professionally managed is probably the best option for you. Is going to kind of de-risk their situation. But even if they're not ready to invest and they don't have the sort of profit you're talking about, they're not earning $30,000 kind of dollars a month and they've got 15,000 to allocate. Even if they started out with something, whether it's they seek advice or do something online, they're then going to build knowledge and experience in it. So even if they'll put in like $500 of the 15,000 they've got available away, that's going to massively help them in the future, because it's going to compound and slowly have an effect over time, albeit not a huge effect relative to their profit. But the second thing is when the stakes get higher and they have more than 15,000 to invest, they're going to know what to do with it. They're going to have to use that as a baseline to compare against investing in their business. And they'll think, right, say they get up to £50,000 profit, right, or dollars even. They're going to now have experience. I think, right, the business is doing really well now. I probably should start taking 25,000 of this off the table into that stocks and shares portfolio I've got, or, it could be property, it could be another business, whatever. But they've got the experience and knowledge to know how to allocate the money. To begin with, if they don't, they can just take advice or find a mentor who kind of knows this sort of stuff.
Quick interjection into the podcast. I know a lot of people watching the podcast that haven't yet subscribed. I have one small favor, so help us get bigger and better guests to give you more value. It's hit the subscribe button. I appreciate it massively. What would you say to people in their opinion, like when they sum up investments, if we look at the things that are in trend, is crypto is really, really popular, and then you also like people in the UK have an obsession over property.
Yeah.
What would be your perspective on, say, crypto and real estate, let's say in the UK real estate, versus the stock market?
Yeah, so this is always a controversial one, when I have this conversation, especially with the UK people. So if we tick a couple of boxes first, it's really hard to compare because obviously there's loads of different types of crypto or coins even. The same with property, right? So UK property, you have your kind of standard buy-to-lets, development, HMOs, etc. So it's hard to do a direct comparison, but generally speaking, if you look at things like the Halifax or nationwide indexes for property, they don't particularly provide a very attractive return, not for the sort of things we would probably look for. A lot of my clients, 4%, and that's before kind of tax costs and a load of other stuff in the UK. So in my opinion, property in the UK is kind of a bit of a dead investment. There's a time and a place though. So if someone is absolutely stacking it, putting some of their money in property instead of cash might be a really good option, especially if most of their other money is already in businesses or a stocks and shares portfolio. So it does have its place. It's all about the client's specific circumstances. Just like if the reverse happens and I meet someone who's got a load in property, I'd be telling them, they're overweight property and there's probably a lot more they can be doing with their money in terms of return, lowering risk, etc. So the short answer is, I think property in the UK, for the returns you get, the tax you pay, the costs involved, the hassle in most cases, the lack of liquidity. You can't just like sell a bathroom and whip 20 grand out. It's just not attractive for me and most of the people I deal with, friends and clients. And I think there's much better options. A stocks and shares portfolio, it's generally speaking returns. If it's 100% equity, so 100% in stocks and shares, you've got no defensive assets like property or bonds or other types of investments. Typically, an all equity portfolio can range from 7 to 11%, say, net of fees. We're talking indexes here.
Yeah.
I want to be careful what I say, and this is certainly not
So
advice.
for indexes, for people listening, what's that?
So an index is just tracking a market. So if you're putting the money in, say, an S&P 500 or the FTSE 100 or the MSCI World, a global index, there is much better things, in my opinion, to do than dropping your money into an index for probably obvious reasons. The best advantage to those is the low cost and simple when anyone can go online and do it. The downside is you can often be exposed to a lot more risk because you're in one market. You can get better returns, in my opinion, if it's actively managed, but that is a huge debate in the industry and one probably won't have time for today. So I think if you take the grand scheme of things, you're going into a stocks and shares portfolio with 2,000 positions all over the world, different industry sectors, so 2,000 companies, right? You need all those companies to disappear overnight to lose your money. So I think that from a risk perspective, yes, it might be more volatile. The property prices might be a bit more stable than a stocks and shares portfolio. But I think from a risk management perspective, I would rather have my money spread across 2,000 companies than invested in one or two properties. And that's about going into liquidity is better. If you want to get money out, you can just get 10 grand out, 100 grand out, £1 million out within typically 5 to 7 working days with most investment firms or online platforms. Tax, you can do a lot of planning around tax in the UK with stocks and shares, you can't really as easily with property. So that's a massive tick in the box. So, when I'm looking at the certain variables that are super important when it comes to investing, what risk do you want to take? What sort of returns do you want? You want to minimize tax. You want to keep liquidity. I think it's hard to compare them in the sense of, I think an equity portfolio is a far superior option and is way more popular with our clients nowadays anyway.
And then the third option of the reckless cryptocurrency, what's your perspective on that? So like recently, obviously like the biggest event where people lost more money than ever when the price crashed recently with a kind of US-China tariff situation again for multiple time. And someone who's invested in crypto, I think I first bought Bitcoin in like 2014, 2015. I think I said this the other day. It's it was kind of relevant because I had fuck all money at the time. I put like $3,000 in, and obviously it's worth a lot more now. But which is why I say to people is if you just actually make more money, you can then invest a lot more and make more money. I feel like crypto has aged me, and my stress tolerance has also increased a lot because it's just used to kind of yo-yoing up and down so much. What's your perspective? Because I see a lot of young people really kind of get pulled into that, in particular like with the meme coin hype. And I know when the market's inflated, because loads of clients will start messaging me asking stuff about crypto. I'm like, dude, like slow down.
So again, kind of to really, this is not financial advice, what I'm going to say next. It's just one guy's opinion. But I have friends that work in crypto, run exchanges, as kind of like, not necessarily as high up as you get, but, super knowledgeable in this space. I'm in crypto groups, like quite exclusive groups. So I see what goes on. And generally speaking, I'm not a huge fan. I often get criticized for this. I'm the guy who builds people's wealth, and they're like, well, Dan, look at what Bitcoin's done over X, Y, Z. But realistically, it's actually has some similarities to stocks and shares, right? So if you go and just dump your money in kind of one stock, you're so much exposed. I can't remember what it's called, idiosyncratic risk, right? So just like if you go into one type of crypto, so like Bitcoin or whatever, you're kind of generally more exposed. But with Bitcoin, for example, it's probably one of the safer bets, if not the safest bet to go into. And if you go for a long-term buy and hold approach, so you bought it ages ago and you still hold it today, you would have done very well, right? And there's realistically a high probability if you put money into Bitcoin today, as long as obviously like blockchain, the tech all plays out and government doesn't interfere too much, and there's a load of reality, there's a load of risk that could happen to things like Bitcoin. 5 years from now, there's a high probability it will be higher than what it is today, right? So if you're doing a long-term play like you do with stocks and shares, that is what eliminates a lot of the risk. When it comes to like the meme coins and whatever, that is, for me as a wealth manager, absolutely gambling. Just like traders with stocks and shares, that isn't investment. There's a big difference between investment and trading. So a lot of traders lose money, and I know traders at some of the top firms, and they take instructions from clients, buy Apple stock, sell Apple stock, and the clients lose money. And it's not the trader's fault, they're just executing, they're execution only. But the client should have just bought Apple and held it, a bit like Bitcoin. So the kind of bottom line is, I think there's a place for cryptocurrency as a holding in someone's general portfolio of wealth, and generally, if I'm speaking to clients, especially my younger clients, if it's 5% of kind of their liquid net worth, I don't have too many concerns because they lose it, they're not going to be broke. It's when I come across kind of these guys in their 20s where they've got like 90% of their wealth in crypto, and I have to turn around to them and be like, look, man, like you can literally lose anything. And obviously with what happened in the last few weeks, there's guys who are multimillionaires and end up committing suicide off the back of what had happened because they've lost everything. They're not got a specific skill where they can just build that back up.
I think that's almost one of the worst things about cryptocurrency, because almost people have just hit kind of pot luck to some degree, made a few million quid, and then if you lose that few million quid, you don't actually have the skill set to get it back.
Your life completely changes overnight. It's a bit like these like young kid celebrities where they grow up and then they're like lost, and it's almost like, what do you do then, when they're used to just having this kind of this crazy lifestyle and everything just gets kind of wiped. So it doesn't need to be that way. And I think the examples you see, you're always going to see the glamorous side of it, right? You don't really see
the losses.
You don't see the 99% that constantly lose money. I get told, by clients, some of them are really transparent and they've lost a lot of money like in the past, and like there's no judgment on my side. I'm like, at least they're trying to invest and like build their their wealth, right? But I just kind of steer them in the right direction and say maybe do it like a bit different moving forward. But if you ask me how many people have come into my office, so to speak, and said, Dan, you know, I've made X million in crypto, I now want to de-risk. There's only one or two exceptions in my entire career.
Really?
Yeah. And I've never met the guy who's got the multi-million-pound house who did it all through crypto, by the way. Not got one client like that. You know, they've built their wealth through other ways, and they now may have a large crypto position. And thank God they might be talking to me about de-risking it. And don't get me wrong, if I look at their situation and they're absolutely stacking it and they've got, say, 5 mil liquid and they've got like $1 million crypto, so it's 20%, and they really are keen on holding it, you know, I'm not going to kind of like,
it doesn't really matter at that point.
Yeah, I'm not going to bust their balls over it, but I'll tell them the truth, and I'd say probably kind of keep that position where it is. Don't increase it. This is how much I'd have in crypto. This is how much you should really hold in property, generally speaking, for your age, your objectives, your circumstances, whatever. But yeah, I think there's a time and a place for property, crypto, and a share portfolio, but I'm a little bit biased towards the share portfolio because it's just stood the test of time. You know, it's a bit like property has stood the test of time, but it's just a better option in my opinion.
How do you think, so one of the big things I see people make really bad decisions with money is making emotional decisions. So like people want to sell when the market's tanked, and then they want to buy when the market's going really fast.
Yeah, of course.
And like one of the big things I've always tried to do is the exact opposite from everyone else. I messaged the other week being like, yeah, you probably know, I just bought a load of crypto because the market crashed. What's your advice to people in terms of like, when it comes to decision making and kind of handling their emotions?
It's almost like a little bit when it comes to business, right? You'll get this. Business owners get a harsh kind of rep sometimes for being kind of like a bit brutal. But what happens is, as you know, business kind of wears you down over time. You have to deal with some pretty kind of like hard stuff sometimes. And initially, as a younger business owner, you take stuff quite emotionally. You know, if you have a member of staff leave, you're like, oh, what have I done? And then you kind of got to start to strip out the emotion for it. And I think you apply that, like you'd apply to business. You know, taking up the emotion out of decisions is a sensible option. You tend to make more logical decisions. So something I do sometimes, if someone triggers a certain emotion in me, good or bad, and I'm about to send an email or make a call off the back of it. There's a kind of famous, I think it was Abraham Lincoln, who used to kind of, when he'd get angry and write a letter, he'd put it in his top drawer and he'd wait till the next day, and like 90+% of letters never got sent out, right? And I always remember that, and I think just don't do something today. Don't send that excited message or that message where you're going irate at someone, right? Just let 24 hours pass. It's very, very similar when it comes to investment, but of a longer time horizon. You have to strip out emotion and look at logic and theory and what has consistently worked over time. You know, history sadly does like repeat itself, and market cycles have a lot of similarities. So an investor learning more about behavioral finance and just self-teaching, building their financial literacy is a no-brainer. You know, you could read a couple of books and you'd be in the top 1%, and you probably know more than some advisors I know. Probably might need to cut that out. That's a joke, it's fine. The easy option to make it simpler for people is if you're in the position where you can take financial advice, and near enough anyone could, because there's an advisor for everyone, so to speak. Their job is to do that for you. So they're there to stop you doing silly stuff and also push you to do stuff when it feels maybe uncomfortable. So when the market drops, right, if I'm having a conversation with the right sort of clients, they've got the liquidity, I know, and I can assess their risk appropriately, you know, they should probably be investing, you know, and I can take the worry or typical fears that have the emotional side out and say, look, you know, we know what we're doing. You know, okay, the markets might go down a bit more, but they're at a 10, 20% discount. You know, I can't promise you or guarantee a return, but it could be a more favorable entry point right now, right? And that is part of my job, behavioral coaching. Just kind of a little side note to that. One of the massive advantages of when people have advisors or wealth managers is there's a report by Vanguard. Funny enough, Vanguard are known for producing passive funds like index, basically low cost funds trackers. And they do a report called Advisor Alpha. And supposedly a good wealth manager, a good advisor can stick 3% per annum onto someone's returns. And that's through things like behavioral coaching, rebalancing the portfolio. But the behavioral coaching part actually makes up quite a big part, because I've stopped clients doing some crazy things with their money. And I dread to think with the situation I'd be in if we'd not taken a different course of action. And I just have had to tell them the truth. You know, sometimes they don't want to hear it, but my job is to just, you know, unfilter.
Are you allowed to give an example of one of those? Obviously not saying names.
Yeah, I can. because I won't obviously mention someone specifically. So some examples, I had a client in my early years, he wanted to buy a racehorse, and I was like, probably not the best investment, and you don't have a lot of other investments with us or externally. So this is a big proportion of your wealth.
How much was it?
And, it was like, I think it was like 25, 50 grand, I'm going to say. So it wasn't like crazy, but I don't think he had that even with us. This is my early years. So it was like quite a big portfolio for us at the time if you had like 50K. And I was like, really, you need to be kind of building up like your pension. You're not going to be able to retire in the next like 10, 15, 20 years. Going down the route of buying this racehorse, and he's like, no, my friends told me about this, and I was like, don't do it. And in this is one of the few examples where he didn't take my advice. And normally, people are paying for my advice, so they normally do take it, and he didn't. And then I got the call, and I don't always get the call, remember, where they confess what's happened, and they're like, Dan, the first race, the horse broke its leg and got put down. Ooh. And I was just like, obviously gutted for him, and you can't turn around to a client and be like, look, I told you so. It was a very, very silly decision. But I've had the same with film studios, where that's a common one. That used to be like a big thing that would pop up. Someone's has promised some stupid return. If anyone is ever promising some sort of outrageous return, the only reason that return exists, that someone could say, I'm going to give you 20, 25% per annum, is there's high risks involved. And if you believe there isn't, it's because you don't know what they are. You've not assessed them properly. So you need to find out what they are. If then you understand the risk and you understand why someone's promising you, say, 25% per annum, then fair enough, you can make an informed decision. So I've had to do that with clients sometimes and said, this is what you're missing. Someone's kind of contacted you about this whiskey kind of venture. They're promising a guaranteed 20%. I'm like, firstly, it's not guaranteed. No one can guarantee that. And then I uncover the risks and say to the client, look, this is where I see the holes in it. It's up to you what you do next. I can't advise as per se, but this is my kind of general thoughts on it.
What's the best financial decision someone's made as a client?
Well, pick me as their advisor, obviously. I think one of the best things, it's more decisions clients have made, it's the clients that have been with me for some time. So the trust has been really built up. They've seen the results in their portfolio, so they get to a point where it's kind of like we've got like a flow state between me and the client, and where I know they've had extra liquidity. So this is more applicable to business owners, because I can think of a number of examples where they've had a substantial amount of cash, 7 figures, sitting in a company investment account, a company cash account, and they don't necessarily need the cash, and the markets have dropped, and they've decided to kind of take the advice. And you've got to be really careful here, because I can't necessarily someone advise during the middle of a pandemic, because people are running around, buying all the loo roll. I don't know what's going to happen next. No one knows what's going to happen next, realistically. But what I do know is their portfolio is 15, 20% down. It's at a discount. It may go down another 5, 10%. It may not. We may be catching the bottom. I just have to level with the client. Like, these are the different scenarios that probably will play out. But realistically, since markets began, they typically recover within a year and a half. And at the minute, they've dropped so much because of uncertainty. So remember, markets are primarily driven by investor sentiment, by psychology, more than anything else. Wherever a share price is, or the market is, it is just someone's opinion. And what there is typically is an intrinsic value. So that basically means the company is actually valued here, but the share price can be higher or lower based on psychology, investor sentiment, right? So during the pandemic, loads of companies are absolutely fine. In fact, some companies are probably going to benefit off the back of the pandemic, but the share prices have dropped through the floor because everybody's terrified and investor sentiment is at an all-time low, right? So from a psychological point of view, what is probably the best thing to do? Well, you can buy everything at a discount, and if you've got the money to do it, amazing. But you've got to just accept that in the short term, you're going to feel uncomfortable if you're a less experienced investor. The clients that invested, for example, during the pandemic with me, it was a handful of more high net worth clients. So they had the liquidity and had the ability to take advantage of it. And they did very, very well off the back of it in the next 12 months because it recovered quite quickly, if you got back to normal.
Quick introduction to the podcast. I want to make this specifically for you to help you achieve everything you want in life. So I have one small ask. Let me know what you actually want. If there's anything you want to see specifically on the podcast, drop it in the comments. If there's anything you specifically want to learn about in the podcast, drop it in the comments or message me on Instagram. Now back to the podcast. Do you think it's having that contrarian approach to investing and just doing the opposite of what everyone else, like, if everyone's kind of shitting their pants, it's like, okay, this is now the time to buy. It's like the opposite sentiment of everyone else.
Typically, yeah. And I mean, that's kind of like there's a famous Warren Buffett quote, where it's like, be fearful when others are greedy, greedy when others are fearful. I think that's so relevant to life though. Normally doing the opposite where everyone else is doing is the right thing. And in the short term, you got to look like an idiot. People are going to criticize you. You know, you get it on social media, right? You go against the grain, you be contrarian, which I personally love doing. And I just accept there's going to be the heat. And it's the same with investment decisions. In the short term, you might feel uncomfortable. People are going to think you're probably bonkers, but in the long term, it normally plays out. But you just need to make sure kind of the decision you're making is genuinely sound, because people obviously be contrarian, but do be contrarian in a bad way. Yeah. So like, for example, being contrarian.
Illogical.
Yeah. So like an example of being contrarian in a bad way would be going and buying a load of meme stocks. So like your typical Joe Public aren't doing, you know, a young lad thinks he's now kind of got like in his flow with like buying these meme coins, and he's like, yeah, I know what I'm doing. You know, I've read some threads, and then he starts chucking all his money into this, and he's being contrarian. He's not really being contrarian. He's just kind of acting out of impulse and emotion, and it's probably underestimating the lack of knowledge he has in the space.
With the compound effect of money, what do you think people should set targets in terms of like their own personal net worth growth, and like what is a realistic percentage for people to try and grow their net worth every year?
Yeah, I think that's a really tough question to answer, because again, everyone's situations are so different. But broadly speaking, I think the best thing you can do is try and think as far into the future as humanly possible. Like, what is your end goal? And if you understand what they are from a kind of like emotional sense. So for someone I met the other day, you know, they're like, Dan, I'd love to just have a farm. You know, and that was like, I was trying to understand it. I was like, right, how much do you think all this is going to cost? And they're like talking about the farm and all these other things, right? And we worked out kind of what they need per annum to have that lifestyle. And funny enough, this guy, he was like basically there. I'm like, so why aren't you doing it now? And that was really a question he had to go away and think about, because he's like, yeah, that's a good point. You know, we could structure things a bit better, and we could potentially do it. He could potentially do it now. So thinking about where you want to be longer term is really, really important. And that figure's so different. You got to think, I've got clients who can retire modestly in the UK on 20k a year. I don't know how anyone could realistically do that, but they believe they can. They've got hardly any costs, so potentially possible. And I've got clients in Dubai who literally want to retire on $1 million USD a month, right? So that's why it's a tough question to ask, because it's all relative to someone's ambition, where they are currently in life, and also how realistic they are. Because I have to have some very interesting conversations sometimes where people are wildly out, and I have to almost say that that's actually never going to happen, you know, in your current circumstances.
As in they can't get to the goal they want with their current level of net worth and the income they currently have.
Yeah, so I'll give you an example, and we'll change the professions around a bit so this can't be tracked down. But there was an individual I spoke to once. Let's say he was a doctor. He had like £40,000 in his pension and wanted to retire in a couple of years. And I was like, well, what do you need to retire on? He was like £100,000 a year. And I was like, okay, so where's the money going to come from? And obviously I have to ask him this in like the most politest professional sense, you know? And he was like, well, obviously my pension. And I was like, well, you've only got £40,000 in the pension at the minute. So if you retired today, for example, you're going to use that within a few months, and you're telling me you need £100,000 a year. So, and I was like, I'm good, but I can't grow your £40,000 into what would need to be about 2 million in the space of 2 years. You're going to have to contribute heavily. And even if you contributed all your earnings for the next few years, you're still going to have a pension pot of say he built his 40k pension pot up to like 200 grand. A typical income someone would take from a pension pot or an investment portfolio is 5%. It's not because it produces 5%, it's called a safe withdrawal rate. So simply speaking, for every £1 million someone has invested, an advisor would say if you take 4 or 5% out of that, 40, 50 grand a year, the investment portfolio should grow. And that means they'd never run out of money technically, right? So this guy technically needs about 2 million, give or take, to produce 100 grand a year comfortably. But it's only got 40k in his pension. So I had to have a very challenging conversation with him and kind of like pop his bubble, and also tell him what he's realistically going to live off.
How old was he?
I'm going to say
50s?
Early 50s. Yeah.
So do you think a lot of people stick their head in the sand until too late? These sort of things?
Everyone.
Yeah.
Absolutely everyone. And I don't get sometimes why people don't engage early with an advisor or someone who does what I do, you know, wealth manager, just even going for a coffee and having a chat. Because sometimes you got to imagine how many people I've met and we're not the right fit for whatever reason right now, but I've kind of set them on their journey, and I've had people come back like years later and like, Dan, I've now done all this. and then we can actually work together. Or we might never end up working together, but I've just got them going on their journey. So I don't understand why sometimes people have gone all the way to like 50 years old, and then the most common bit of feedback I get in the office is someone comes around to me and is like, Dan, you know, I wish I met you like 20 years ago. And they're just sorting their finance out when they're 50 and we're like consolidating pensions, restructuring their investment portfolio. They've only been growing their pensions and investments at like 4% for the last 20 years. Just barely keeping up with inflation. So they would have had a completely different life in retirement. And their biggest regret, and honestly, it's probably the one I hear the most, is I wish I met you like 10, 15, 20 years ago. I'd have been very young then.
Well, I think it's the power of the compound effect of money. And that's also why like I get frustrated that I only started to make a decent amount of money the last few years, whereas I did that when I was like 21, and you invested that for another 10 years, like you'd be sitting on so much money from just no extra work just because of time. Yeah,
and time compounds for the good and the bad with decision making, right? And it's not just money, it's relationships and everything, right? So what's really good is, you know, sometimes people feel like they're a bit late to the party. So I've got clients obviously here in the UAE that are in their 20s and they feel like they lost a bit of time, and they've obviously just met me and I'm like, no, we've got loads of time. The same, you know, in your 30s, realistically, there's not many people I know in their 30s, mainly in the UK, that actually engage with a wealth manager. They maybe have the belief that they don't have enough money to, because there's a lot of like limiting beliefs around this whole topic in general. But the impact you can make is phenomenal. And if anyone wants proof in the pudding, you know, if you literally type into Google or even ChatGPT, you know, do a compounding calculation on X. So if I started saving $1,000 a month or $5,000 a month or 10,000, whatever someone can afford, and compound it at a rate of 6, 7, 8, 9%, depending on what they might invest in, what will it be in 10 years, 20 years? They will be gobsmacked with what kicks out the other side. You know, I don't need to do this stuff for clients anymore. You know, I used to have to obviously manually do that, and now people can just bash all this stuff into ChatGPT.
Do you think people's relationship with money has changed over the last, say, like 5 years since the pandemic?
Definitely people's relationship is changing with money. I think what's really nice now is there is more financial literacy with people I meet. I think for some advisors that might scare them. They feel like they're less useful. I think it's the opposite, because where I had to like spend a lot of time knowledge building, the clients that come into contact now are more sophisticated investors. They've already got a base knowledge. And the great thing is they know they should be working with me, which is you know, it's a game changer. The best thing as well is they will then go and do their own research and reinforce what I teach them. So if they go on ChatGPT and pump in a load of stuff that I talk to them about, hopefully they don't put in their personal circumstances and then their money situation, but something obviously like, what do you call it? Don't disclose everything. They can almost like verify what I'm trying to tell them. And I can even kind of point them in the right direction of what they should be looking into and researching. So it actually, the changes in the last 5 years has meant people are better educated when it comes to money, whereas maybe 5-10 years ago, people definitely made poorer financial decisions. The problem now I think you've got on the flip of this is the information overload. So what you didn't have 5-10 years ago is TikTokers like jumping up saying, just put your money in the S&P 500. And I'm like, oh my God, you know, that is so hard for me to see, where these people have never managed any money in their life. And they're telling people just putting your money in the S&P 500 is the best option. And although it's not a bad option for someone starting out, there is better things you can do.
As in you can get a higher return for the same kind of risk?
I think you could take a lot less risk and get a better return.
Because there'd be more diversification.
Exactly. Like, why go into just the US market? Why go into technically just the top 7 companies? Because it makes up the bulk of the S&P 500, the top or magnificent 7 as are known. You know, I think the US market makes up like 40% of the global market cap. So you're missing out on 60% of the world. You know, why don't you go into 2,000 odd companies instead of 500, even though it's not technically 500? So you can massively reduce risk, and also a good global portfolio can outperform the S&P 500. It is challenging, you know, especially if you've got the cost of advice, but then you got to not blend performance data with advice, because I've saved clients millions of pounds through advice, stopping them doing silly things, making them do things they should be doing, saving them tax, and that's nothing to do with performance, right? So even if they, for example, got the same return as an index, which they won't necessarily do, the idea is we do better than the market if we can. Even if they got the same return, the advice would be worth the additional cost because of all the money we've saved them in other ways, right? or even financial planning, you know, making sure someone gets to where they need to be. So if you said to me, Charlie, you know, I want X amount per annum as a passive income at this age, you know, I will make sure you get there, and I'll tell you what you need to be doing. If you kind of veer off the road, I'm going to kind of nudge you back on. And if you veer off again and you're like, Dan, someone's talking about this meme coin, I'll be like, no, get back on here a bit more. So that is worth its weight in gold compared to just someone banging money in an index.
It's interesting about how much money do you want to kind of have your dream lifestyle. So I think I said this to you the other day. I think I worked out for me it's about 32, 34K a month, which sounds like a lot, but it's not that.
Not as much in Dubai.
Yeah, like I can pretty much do whatever I want at that point.
Yeah.
And I think it's not obscene. And I think that's also when people kind of break that down as like you can actually achieve whatever you want. You don't need as much money as you think sometimes.
No, absolutely. I see a common trend, especially in Dubai here with the figures, right? So we could talk a pot value or like monthly income. So I think with $10,000 even in Dubai, for someone who lives a more modest lifestyle, they can still do a lot, you know, especially it depends if you have certain costs like mortgages or rent that are quite high. You know, if you live quite modestly, you can do a lot with $10,000. I think 20 to 30, you're in a position where there's not much you can't do without flying around in helicopters and doing silly stuff, right? You can travel pretty much whenever you want. You can kind of buy whatever food you want. You don't look at the bill really as much anymore. Again, within reason. If you're going to every night to top restaurants, you're going to burn through the money a bit quicker. So that $20 to $30,000 or pounds, whatever way you want to look at it, not too dissimilar, gives most people what I would say is kind of like a proper kind of millionaire lifestyle, without a doubt. You can do it on a lot less so. There's people who look like they live in millionaire lifestyles and are on like $10,000 a month for sure. It's just they're just smarter with their money and they don't go and buy the Ferrari and other stuff, for example.
You work with a lot of big fitness influencers, creators, and some other people would know on social media. What would you say is the big mistakes you see people kind of in the online space consistently making?
Yeah, so do you want the brutal truth?
Yeah, go for it.
So influencers are probably the hardest clientele to work with because they're an influencer, they have to have a perceived lifestyle. So they don't take advice as well. You know, you really have to kind of like push them.
It's in reining in their spending.
Yeah, like reining in their spending, and also just like kicking things off. Like I'm like, get started. Like you're gonna regret this. You're like losing years, and I have to kind of push them to get to where they need to be. And I'm like, look, if you take my advice or not, it makes no difference to me in the grand scheme of things. But like you're gonna regret losing these years. So I think because they need to maintain a certain lifestyle, so they'd rather buy kind of like the G-Wagon and look like they've got a lot of money, then actually have a higher net worth where they're going to never have to change their lifestyle. In fact, their lifestyle is only going to get better, you know. Whereas their lifestyle, realistically, a lot of them will probably go downhill at a certain point, and they'll look back at kind of the good days where they could afford the G-Wagon and be like, damn, you know, the industry's changed now. I should have banked a load of that money. And I know this because, remember, I've been doing this 15, 20 years. So I see the same stories with guys in their 50s who say the same thing. Not obviously fitness influencers who are now 50, but it's a similar story. It's a repeating pattern. So that's kind of the first issue, I think, typically with influencers of any kind, not just fitness. But the second one is just that they have to do it from a communication and flaky point of view. You know, if you're business minded,
100%.
If you, I mean, I think, Charlie, massive respect to you. You know, you're very different. You're like very business focused, systematic, regimented, disciplined, and that is like the traits you need in the gym. You know, a lot of them. So the good thing is you do actually take advice, and you know, there's that saying, you know, surround yourself by people smarter than you. But what can be quite difficult with influencers sometimes is, you know, they can be very difficult to get over the line, really flaky, hard to deal with. And like, it's just, in the end, I just sometimes give up and I'm like, it's just, like, I've tried to help you. Just go and speak to someone else.
So I've like, obviously we coach hundreds and 1,000 plus fitness trainers at this point, and we've had some people who have been more kind of influencer basis clients, and transparently they're normally the worst clients, and they have the most potential, but they cannot get out of their own way. Yeah. And for me, I feel I just like want to fucking shake them because it's like, this is so retarded, dude. And I see the same thing you mentioned about spending. This literally cripples and kills me inside. And I'll ask you when you think this is appropriate. I know how much money a lot of these people are making.
Yeah.
And I see them posting going like business class flights here, X, Y, Z, or first class. I'm like,
what are you doing, bro?
Like, why?
Yeah.
Why? Like,
but it's like that. They're willing to sacrifice their future for some likes. It's actually like insanity. But I see that in general, in my job. And what's really hard is like people should, it's not necessarily about net worth is in the money. It's about like getting to whatever net worth you need to be to facilitate your lifestyle. So it might be looking after your parents, retiring your parents.
For me, the big thing is peace of mind.
Well, for me, that is without a doubt why I do what I do and push on, because I would rather all day have X mil sat in an equity portfolio knowing that I don't need to work anymore and that no one controls my diary. If anything changes, I'm fine for the rest of my life. My lifestyle's only ever going to get better. It's not going to go down. I keep clicking save on the game, as I've said to you before. That's the goal. You click save, bank some money along the way, click save, you're not going back to square one. I'd do that all day long than having 4 supercars sat on the driveway or 5 Rolexes, whatever. I just don't care about that stuff. I'd rather own companies, have equity, than have these materialistic things that just come and go anyway. Obviously, there is the caveat there. There's a time and a place. I'm not saying I've not bought those things. I used to have a McLaren, which I've now sold. But because you need to reward yourself and have some enjoyment. But I think people struggle to get that balance. And sadly, it's normally kind of the wrong way around, especially if they're new to coming into money. That's where people need the most guidance, when they've not had this level of wealth, and you're like, you got to start doing this now.
I saw a brilliant story, and I put a post on it on LinkedIn yesterday. It was about Ronaldinho. Yeah. So Ronaldinho was making 10 million a year when he was at Barcelona, and he is now in debt for $4 million, and he can't pay it because his brother was managing his money for him.
See, that's also, by the way, something that happens to me occasionally. Like someone tells me, I get the most hilarious messages back, right? So we do some outreach sometimes on LinkedIn and stuff like that in the UK. It's been a really good way for us to kind of build our business over time. And someone will come back to me and be like, my brother manages my money, or my uncle, or like I've got an accountant. I'm like, well, what I do is very different than accountant. That's tax.
So it might be, so someone says that, it's the complete lack of financial knowledge. If you say your accountant manages your money.
And I don't know, I try and say to them, like, I get it, but like you want to keep this stuff really separated, So it's really sad to see that. And because I love what I do, I'm passionate about my job. And when I know someone's sacrificed a lot to get to where they need to be, especially the sort of clients I work with now, I'm so blessed to work with so many talented, successful, inspiring people like yourself, Charlie, sitting here today, right? But I know what it takes to get to where you are today and what you still do. I know the work you put in, right? So for me, the ultimate pleasure is being like, right, let me help you amplify those results, 10x them without you having to work harder. And hopefully, if you want to take your foot off the gas over the next couple of years, you'll be able to as a result. So it's just so sad when you see the opposite, where they've been let down. And sadly, there's people in my industry who do exactly that, and the UAE, sadly, has got a bad reputation for financial advice, over the last 10 to 15 years. It's quite far behind the UK. And that's one of the reasons, 2 years ago, we moved out here and expanded the business.
What do you think? Do you think it's much easier to accumulate wealth living in Dubai than living in the UK and to be successful?
Absolutely. The people who turn around, I've got a massive bugbear about this.
This is going to be good because I've got some stuff on this as well.
Yeah, there's a frustration where I see people turn around and they've left Dubai and they slate it, and then they say Dubai costs loads of money to live there, and like you just spend all the money you earn. So yeah, you save tax, but you just spend it all, and that's just absolute, excuse my language, bollocks. Because if you live a normal lifestyle or relative to your means, you make sure you're packing money away because you're saving the tax. Like takeaways for me here, if I have a takeaway, it's less than in my town in the UK. The same with like taxes, fuel. There's so many things that are actually cheaper. And obviously, if you go and live on the palm, right, your costs are going to be a bit higher. But there's also a lot of people who live in Dubai who have your kind of normal, what we class as blue collar jobs, right? And they are obviously not kind of dining out at like a Le Petit Maison and stuff like that in the evenings, right? They're kind of going shopping somewhere. So clearly you can live affordably in Dubai. So it's just like absolute nonsense that Dubai isn't an environment where you can accumulate more wealth. It's a million times harder in the UK for no end of reasons. There's less like-minded people, there's less opportunity, the tax is higher, like the list literally goes on. Here, I think people underestimate the effect of the environment and the people you're around, because I've got friends who have moved here, and I mean this in the nicest sense. If they had stayed in the UK, they would just be on your typical 50, 60K. And I won't name the professions because it might narrow these people down because they're friends and clients of mine. Here, you know, they're earning very, very good six-figure salaries. They're going on holiday all the time. They've got an amazing house. There's no way these individuals, I mean, they work hard still, but they just would not have had the opportunity. Not a chance. And including myself, you know, the last couple of years, even me being here, the opportunities that have come my way as a result of being around the right sort of people, you just would never have that back in the UK, sadly. So
the way I frame it is like living in Dubai and generating wealth and being successful in business and just being successful in life. It's actually playing the game on easy mode.
Yeah,
because you
yeah.
think a lot of the big problems are getting pulled straight off of you straight away, like things like tax, even in terms of, say, like legislation, it can be difficult depending where you live in the world. If all these things are kind of gone, you kind of got free reign, and you've also got the compound effect over a period of time.
Yeah.
And then you throw in the mix, you've got the most talented and the best people in the world, all in the same space within 20 minutes. It's a recipe for success.
Yeah, it's almost like if you put the right effort in and you build your network and you've actually got value and a skill to offer other people, right? It's almost hard not to make money here, I think. It's just, like you said, by default, you're surrounded by some of the top people in the world in their industries, and everyone is a lot more open to helping you without wanting something in return, because they're normally doing well themselves, and they'll meet someone. You know, we've had some conversations recently, Charlie, right? And I'm like, you know, there's a great opportunity here, you know, and you just don't have that in the UK. And a lot of the time, if it does happen in the UK, which it just doesn't, people want stuff in return, people get envious. And I don't want to speak ill of the UK because I have a lot of love for the place, but the reality is it's just a very different world out here in a very different environment. And generally speaking, the experience I've had over the last 2 years is there's people who have gone out of their way to really help me. And I think in the UK, the perception would be, Dan's already doing okay. You know, he's already successful. You know, not going to kind of help him anymore. He's done enough, you know. Whereas here, people are like, oh, Dan, like, let me introduce you to some people. You know, you've got to get speaking to this person. Or, oh, Dan, you're having that problem with your business. You know, you've got to go and speak to this guy. And I've never really experienced anything like it.
I think that's where the psychology is so different between the UK and Dubai. Because it's interesting, I put a post on LinkedIn like 2-3 days ago, and you should go look at, like, if you look at the comments, I was like, my God. Like, the first line of the thing was very clickbait. It was something like, you might have to be clinically insane to stay in the UK, like, and pay 50% tax. The weather's terrible, and like, you can have your hand cut off for a watch. Yeah. And like the comments like in it were people just like having massive digs, but they were kind of arguing each other. But one of them was like, well, yeah, I don't want to move to Dubai because I don't want to leave my like local rugby club and the pub and like do this, like, rugby clubs here, and you can also drink here if you want. Like, if that's what your life is about, then like fine. But
it's just excuses, though, right? It's like, that's like a lot of people who don't have the right mindset, and that they'll never get where they need to be. They'll justify their situation. There'll be a reason why they'll hate on you online. You know, you have the fair share of people who will kind of like be disgruntled, leave negative comments, and it's just a reflection of them not taking action in their own life, and they've got to kind of somehow deal with that, right? And you do. It's so funny when you see stuff like that with people who are in the UK. I saw a cracker the other day where someone was like, you basically kind of abandoned your own country, and when the rules change and you can't get a UK passport and come back, you know, like, and I was just like, that is the most ridiculous comment.
And that's why ultimately, like, the world's a mirror, not a window. And I had the same thing with like someone commented on something else, being like, what right do you have to talk about the UK? You don't live there. I was like, dude, I lived in the UK for like 32 years and I'm a British passport holder. Like, to say I don't have right, bear in mind the people who are moving to the UK right now is kind of like a fast joke.
You just like go out and make money and have a good life, man. Like, why are you trolling me?
Yeah.
You know, like, who has time to sit there and write that stuff? And I the thing is, I mean this in a nice sense. I really feel for them, and I don't mean like as in feel sorry and in a horrible way. Like, I'm just like,
the lack you can't understand.
Like, you can't. Yeah, I can't see how they can't see themselves, that they don't have that awareness. And there's that emotional intelligence element, which, you know, I think we had to talk about this recently, Charlie. Right? Emotional intelligence, I think, is far greater than like a lot of skill sets, including traditional IQ. And just people are very self-aware, and they won't kind of look in the mirror, so to speak, and be honest with themselves. So they'll write comments like that, and they won't think, why have I done that? Why have I said that to that child? I don't even know this guy. Why have I made that comment? Why am I even on Instagram scrolling in the first place, or LinkedIn? You know, why am I not like looking after my family, or going out working hard, or like whatever? What
I think is also interesting is that you can leave the UK, move to Dubai for 5 years, make a load of money, and then you can move back and not pay any tax.
Yeah.
So like, if I was someone who has a goal, if I want financial freedom, I'd be like, well, I'm not sure if I want to live in the UK or Dubai, but like if I just go here and absolutely like rinse and repeat for 5 years, move back with my bag of gold back to the UK and not pay anything to HMRC, we're kind of good at that point. Like that would even be my thing if like to provide for my future family the way I think. Yeah, do you know what I mean?
Well, that's a really popular option. You know, a lot of people in the UK are doing that, but what they're doing is, Charlie, and I'll be careful what I say here, is it's a good strategy for business owners, an exit strategy. So say you've got a business in the UK, you know, you're doing well, stacking money in it, and you know you're going to sell in the near future. If you leave and go to the UK, and this is not tax advice to be really clear, after the 5-year window, there's no capital gains tax. You have to be out for 5 years. I think it's technically 6, depending on like how the tax year falls. But as you can imagine, as a business owner, say you stack a load of cash, your business is worth X million, 10, 50, 100 million even, right? And you leave, come to the UAE, and you think, I'm going to do a 5-year stint, you know, smash it. While I'm here, I'm going to exit my business in the UK, pay no capital gains tax. You know, what a great strategy. You know, if someone's exiting for 100 million, that's a lot of money saved, right? But, you know, the sort of people who are doing this are traditionally older business owners in the UK. They're not the sort of people me and you know who are kind of young entrepreneurs here, who can be like small teams of 2 or 3 lads that are performing or getting close to £1 billion valuation on their company. These are like your more traditional UK business owners who are like 50, 60, and the thought of them coming to Dubai is just a no-no. You know, the family ties, kids at uni or older, maybe even grandchildren. So they won't necessarily come to Dubai and do that. So it's very specific.
But I can even give you a counter example of that. There's a guy I met on the beach here on the Palm, as you do, and he sold a payment processor and he's in the Netherlands and he's moved here from Spain, so he doesn't pay. He wanted to move anyway, but then he doesn't pay for the tax benefits. Yeah. Because I don't know how much he sold it for. I don't know any of the details, but like I just thought that's interesting. And he's probably similar age, 50. He's got kids who are like 18 or something. So there's a lot of people doing it. And I also think from like we live in a globalized society now where people will basically move to where is most economically viable for them. Like literally people are moving to the UK because of economic migrants, and then people are leaving the UK, becoming economic migrants to come to Dubai as well. And it's a different spectrum. It's like you swap one for the other, which we probably won't go into. When you look at a lot of kind of like business owners, do you see a lot of them who've got maybe high net worth, but like kind of poor cash flow?
Yeah, all the time. But that's really common because typically, you know, someone's built their net worth, and this is me included, you know, a lot of people's net worth is within their business. And the goal really, or the trick even, is to try and extract that along the way. And that's really hard because sometimes, you know, your business value is increasing, especially if you're reinvesting in the business, it's increasing significantly. And as the cash flow comes in, I mean, if you're in the UK, you know, even if you take the money, you're losing half personally. So building up your personal net worth outside of a business is very hard. You could build up your net worth within a business a bit easier, but it's just incredibly hard to do where people have cash flow. I don't think it's till they are in a more mature business where they start to have the ability to have cash flow. That's the problem. The money's locked up in a business. So the business owners kind of a look after. One of the main goals is early on, we create an exit strategy and a way to start profit extracting along the way. So we're not just got the exit strategy in place for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And that can be quite vague to begin with. You know, you don't need to know it all, but we've got a plan, right? And along the way, we need to work out how we extract profit. And I do that with a lot of clients in the UK. You know, we create structure every year. This is how we're going to get money out. This is what we're going to put it into. This means you're going to be in this position in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And if the business sells, you know, the hypothetical business sale, that's the icing on the cake. Do we build it into our cash flow modeling? No. You know, we can as a scenario so they can see what would happen. But do we consider that as like a kind of solid variable to factor into their financial planning? No. You know, I've got to be the guy who says, let's assume the business has never sells. You know, you keep making money as you are today. We're kind of taking money out of the business, building up other assets. This is where you're going to be at 60, or in the UAE, it might be a 20-year-old trying to get to where he wants to be at 40. And it's about trying to extract money into assets that are going to create that passive income without a business sale.
Do you think people should be trying to focus on retiring as early as possible if they want to, or they should just think, oh, I'll deal with it when I'm 60?
Oh, that's the easy one. Obviously, definitely don't leave it till the 60. I think the one thing you should do is just get that end goal that nailed down to begin with, even if it's like a base goal. Because you don't know how you're going to feel in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. The money you think you're going to need now probably won't be the same amount you're going to need later in life. You might actually be able to live more modestly, let alone naturally as you do better, want a higher level of income. So I think you just need a starting point. So some of these coaches, for example, you look after, right? If they are earning 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 50K a month, whatever, it's them saying, right, you know, if I got to, maybe a starting point for them based on that level of income is if I could get 100K per annum passive in dollars, so per annum, you know, you could live off 100K in Dubai just about passively. And that should be like a first goal, right? So I know I need to do that. What assets do I need? How am I going to create that passive income? Is it going to be through property, stock and shares portfolio, small holding in crypto? So they've got to have that plan. But people don't have the plan in place. It's a bit like, you know, if you were training someone, Charlie, and they were telling you kind of like, well, not telling you, they just turned up to the gym with no goals. You know, they didn't know if they want to lose weight, gain muscle, you know, be more flexible, you know, build a better engine, so to speak. They just turned up to the gym and just wandered around and looked at all the machines. You were like, bro, you know, you need to at least know why you're here to begin with. Then when you know why you're here, say to build muscle, you'd be like, we can create a plan around that, you know, around your training, around your diet, your supplementation. It's no different to that than financial advice. But people just wander around the hypothetical gym of life, right? And they don't know what they're doing. They're just kind of looking at stuff, and they've not got an end goal, a definitive end goal where they're trying to get to.
Do you think a lot of people, when they start making money as well, almost get red shiny object with just spending money on stupid shit?
Initially,
it's like the big mistake.
Yeah, straight away, nearly everyone. And that's really hard to see where people have lost some significant time. Some people learn it fast. So I've met people and caught them really early. Or they just know because it's easy to get the information online now. You know, like people watching this podcast today, it's going to spark a few people. Every time I've done this, you know, people have reached out and been like, I really need to know that. And I've started. But some people can go years where they just get that shiny object syndrome. It's all down to your character as well. You know, some people are really good with delayed gratification. I've been amazing at that my entire life. I've always had a long-term view. Even like when I was 18, you know, I could sacrifice quite easily the short term, and that could be anything, not just money, knowing where I want to be long-term. And I do the same thing today with my own money, with the business. You know, I could have a very, very different lifestyle today, and I don't, because I know 10 years from now, I'll be on a very, very different level or position than what I am today. So the problem is most people struggle with delayed gratification. They want it now, and social media compounds the problem so badly.
Well, it's the thing, people want the easy life now, but the easy life now creates a hard life for them tomorrow.
Absolutely.
That's why, like, you need to think kind of 2 steps down the path, where is this kind of going? Like, yeah. I think that's also, people can often kind of get ahead of themselves in terms of spending or lifestyle, and kind of get pulled down certain rabbit holes. I think that's probably one of the downsides maybe for Dubai when people come here, is that like it's maybe easy to kind of get that keeping up with the Joneses kind of mentality.
In the first like year or two, you see it, you know, typical guy turns up here, works in property, gets a place in the marina, and then goes to like every party every weekend, and just like basically has no money left, and then 90% return back to the UK, and then their perception is that. But again, to use kind of like the gym analogy, it is no different in the sense of like, what do you need, you know, to have like to build a good body in the gym or to lose weight or whatever. You need consistency. You can't go to the gym and come home every night, look in the mirror and expect to see some sort of miraculous change. You've got to keep going every day or multiple times a week, and be disciplined and regimented and consistent with it, and then you'll see the outcome. It's exactly the same with financial principles. You know, someone starts putting $5,000 into a portfolio a month, you know, they're not going to be a millionaire overnight. They've just got to continuously do it and trust the process. So like if you were coaching someone, Charlie, right, you would say, look, just stick to the plan. You know, stick to the diet plan, stick to like the training plan I put together, and you will get there. It might take 6 months, a year, 2 years, depending on your goal, but you've got to, like, I suppose, trust in the process.
What do you think is I know the answer is obviously going to be as much as possible. It depends on the person. What do you think is a decent amount someone should look to be like, okay, if I can put in, you mentioned 5K a month, 5K a month in, and I did that for 10 years, that's a solid investment over a period of time.
It's so relevant to what people can actually afford, but also where they want to be. Some people, like I've got clients who they just don't care about having passed a certain amount of money. I was watching something actually funny enough on Instagram the other day, and this guy was saying like he wanted to get his net worth to a certain point. I don't know what it is. And he was like, after this point, I'm giving away everything. And I have the best life now. Like every penny that goes past this level of net worth that I've now achieved, I give away and to friends, family, good causes. And he said, I love it because I've got everything I need. And he said, I don't know why people keep accumulating past a certain net worth. And it was quite interesting because the first time I heard someone say this, and it really triggered something in my own mind, because I was like, well, where do I want to go? Because I've got my own targets on what I kind of want to achieve per month as a passive income. And then I multiply that up into like a pot value or net worth to achieve that and how I need to do it. So I know what I need to do. But then I've always just thought, well, when I get to that point, I'll probably just increase it. And I think, well, why? What's the point? Because you can actually have an amazing positive effect on the world, and it does time my goals anyway. I'm looking to set up a foundation kind of in the near future. It's been a big, one of my lifetime goals. So that filters into why I keep focusing on keeping the score, so to speak, focusing on building net worth, because if I don't do that, I can't achieve that goal and give back to some causes that really interest me. But it was a different take on that, I suppose, which is quite interesting.
Do you personally then focus on investing the same amount every week, every month?
So the best thing to do is trying to stick to a monthly amount. That is affordable for you and is hopefully in line with wherever you want to be. So if you keep doing X, and if you keep doing it over 5-10 years, you're going to get to Y. Amazing, you've got faith in the process. But I think beyond that, this more applies to business owners or someone who's on commission, right? If you have a good month, and I used to do this, and I still do to this day, I don't need anything beyond that point. So if I pay myself the same level of income every month and my costs are X, right? If we had an extra kind of $40,000 come in a month, by default for me, that goes straight into my investments. I don't think about anything else. I don't think about what I want. Don't think, I'm going to go and treat myself to anything. I'm just right, good month, boom. My net worth is going to increase a bit quicker because that is going to get me close to my goals a hell of a lot faster. So if you kind of get disciplined in the sense of you have a set amount you're putting aside monthly, and then you have the ability to kind of drop lump sums in.
Yeah.
And that's what most of my clients in the UAE do. They set up a low monthly, just so they've got the habit. It's like building the habits. It's like using the muscles every day, so to speak, and go to the gym. But if they have a big result with their business or a good quarter, depending on kind of how they're structured, they'll tend to kind of call me and be like, Dan, I want to drop in an extra 100,000 or whatever.
What's your definition of creating generational wealth?
Oh, it's not just about the money. It's about creating principles for your family. I've seen some really interesting stuff people have done with this. They've got the full kind of what do you call it?
Family crest?
Yes, yeah, that's it. That's what I was looking for. They've got the family crest, they've got the bylaws. Okay. And honestly, it gets that serious. You get to a point, Charlie, if you were 100 plus mil net worth, you think about these things, you got your foundation set up, you need to put structure in place. And I've kind of done a mini version of this for my little boy. I'll call it Dan's Life Lessons, and it's on my kind of Notion. And I'm developing it into a book that the idea is I'm going to pass it to him, obviously, but I'm going to actually release it to the world, because it's just stuff where I cover all areas like health, wealth, spirituality, just stuff I've learned that I wish people told me when I was growing up as a lad, right? That would have saved me so much time, pain, heartache. So I think that's kind of a similar version to what you would do with creating intergenerational wealth, a proper legacy. You need to understand what that figure is and what that looks like, and what level of wealth you need to provide, because your version of creating intergenerational wealth might be, if $1 million passive produce yearly, I don't care who my children are, they should, assuming we account for inflation, of course, that's enough, right? Realistically, but then it's about the other things that people don't think about, like the bylaws and how money should be managed, building a proper family office structure. So you've got the trusted accountant, wealth manager, and so forth around you, private banking set up. So everything's protected, proper offshore structures. So no one's going to come and ruin the family bloodline because they've married some woman from wherever, and
they found an exotic woman in Dubai who fleeced them.
Yeah, and you see that. Sadly, I see that side of things. So it becomes, when you get to a certain point, what's really interesting is when you start out, it's all about growing your money, building, and then it's a switch gets flipped where someone turns around and Dan, what happens if I get sued, or I'm about to get married, is there anything I should do? And I'm absolutely. We'll have this conversation, not now. So I think it becomes about asset protection, and it's from everything, tax, being sued. There's a whole kind of special specialist area of financial advice we provide. So yeah, that ties into kind of the intergenerational piece. You've got to protect kind of your future children and grandchildren from governments, third parties, partners they may meet in the future interfering with the wealth. It's it's complicated. It's one of the most complicated areas of financial advice, but isn't as complicated as people think. The sad thing is, I often get calls for people who don't have the right level of wealth to implement those structures, and you do need to build a certain amount of wealth to really.
Is that just because of the cost involved of setting them up?
It's the annual costs involved of having the structures in place.
Because in the UAE, it's a foundation, right?
Yeah, so you can have what's called like a foundation in the UAE.
Sense trust.
Yeah, set up in DIFC traditionally, and it's similar to a trust. It's not technically a trust, but it's very similar. And I'll be careful about what I say now because we've gone into like financial advice a little bit. But you can obviously set up offshore versions, so it's not kind of based in the UAE. And when you've got, say, different trusts in different countries like the British Virgin Islands, BVIs, Channel Islands, maybe a DIFC foundation, you've got trustees involved who oversee the money. You've got investment firms managing the money, private banking setups. Like some private banks, you need like 2 mil on deposit, just to have it open. And then they provide their facilities, lending, whatever. The running costs of some of these setups can be like over $100,000, like easily. So you need to be generating a serious amount of wealth passively to do that. Typically in the UAE, you can set up some pretty simple structures when you're just getting to that point where you're like, right, if something happens and I get sued, I want this money wrapped up in a foundation or trust. And you can sometimes get away with 30,000 like USD as in running costs, but therefore really it only is worthwhile looking at these things when you're around the 5 mil mark USD. Just as a ballpark. This is like really kind of loose.
Nuance.
Yeah.
Something I found very interesting. So I think a lot of people have a massive limited belief in money in terms of how well they can actually do. I put into AI, what would my life look like? I think it was in like 5 years time. I think it was 5 years time, or it might be 10 years. I can't don't shoot me. Of like where I'll be financially, what will life look like? And it said I'd be like past 100 million. I was like, okay, like AI fucking backs me. I was like, it gave me a bit of a fucking
it's used to your mindset.
Yeah, because I think it mind fucked me to be like, yeah, keep using the tool so we like, you like us. But I thought that was very interesting. I think a lot of people should try and future cast more in terms of where they could be, because I think a lot of people, we talked about like playing not to lose there, but I think generally in life, a lot of people are playing, instead of playing to win, they're constantly playing not to lose, which is why they never actually win.
There's biases that around that, right? In terms of like what is it, loss aversion and stuff like that. So I think people underestimate what can be, how much potential upside there is, especially if you're willing to take calculated risk. And that's the key. Some people are very, very good at taking calculated risk, and some people are just purely reckless, and they'll either kind of completely make it or lose everything. I think you'll be surprised, like what you put into AI, knowing what I know about you, Charlie, without saying too much. Obviously, I would never go against betting you'd do it. I 100% know you will do it. I think it's you can't see the roadmap initially, because say you were sitting at like, I don't mean you personally, like anyone was sitting at 1, 5, 10 mil net worth. The thought of trying to get to 100, you're like, I've got to do something very different, because getting to 100k in earnings, say in the UK, you need to do something different than Joe Public, right? Getting to the £500,000 mark, you need to be one of the best people in what you do in a field. Your C-suite in a FTSE 100 or whatever. A bit different if you're kind of an online entrepreneur in the UAE, because just the rules it's just crazy stuff you see out here. To become a millionaire, you need to adopt a lot of different qualities. And again, you need to kind of learn a different skill set to get to that point. I think the same happens again between 0 to 10. A lot of people, they can get into like, I've got loads of clients in the UK who've got to that territory, right? But to get to 10 mil net worth is really hard, because it again is a completely different skill set than what it takes to kind of break through the £1 million threshold. But to get to 100 mil, it's the same story. And I'm sure going from 100, I don't have enough experience with people dealing in the 100 to billionaire range. Few and far between, some conversations, but not frequently. And I'm guessing, obviously, it's a very, very different story. So I think that's the thing. You have the limiting belief that it is possible, and you don't know what you don't know. But the only way to get there is obviously the constant learning. The people who get there is like the avid learners, the people who build the network. Because even in the last 2 years, my beliefs have completely shifted for myself, my clients.
In what respect?
Because I couldn't see the path to get there. So for myself, if you'd asked me a couple of years ago, could I hit 10 mil net worth? I'd be like, maybe in my lifetime. And I won't say the next bit I was going to say, but like it's not particularly challenging.
It's just how quickly you can do it.
Yeah,
when.
and I know I'll hit 100 million, 100%. And I know how I'm going to do it. And I know if I don't do it in 1 or 2 or 3 ways, I know how I'll do it in the 4, 5 or 6 ways, right?
So this is something, not to cut you off, that most people haven't thought about. So if you can statistically live to 2035, the likelihood of you living to 120 to 140 because of advancements in medical technology increases dramatically.
You're joking.
Therefore, if you live an extra 20 to 30 years of compounding effect of the money you've already built, and you're at the peak amount of wealth you have anyway at that point, it's like you're just running it up.
Yeah. And one thing, if you've not done this, you want to do this. And this is a conversation I had with someone who me and you both know. And if you look at like your net worth now, and people sometimes look at their net worth in the wrong way. For me, it's just a game. Like money gives you the ability to look after your family, gives you freedom. For some people, it gives them other things. And for me, it's just a way of keeping score, because at the end of the year, I want to know that I've made a difference. There's no point me earning X million in revenue and spending X million in revenue. I've gone nowhere. Like what's all the work for? What's all the sacrifice if I haven't spent as much time with my family, for example, right? So I think net worth is just about keeping score and working out, when you look every year, how you've increased it, where it's coming from, tracking like where it's coming from, where you're having the biggest impact, like you would with any business. Yeah, it's interesting what you said. What you want to do is do a compounding calculation. So I know over the last 5 years, in percentage terms, how much I've compounded my net worth, like roughly what I'm kind of averaging, right? And I know to hit a billionaire status, what I need to compound at by, I think, at age 60. So I'm not going to say any figures or throw anything out there, but I know it's actually achievable. But I just need to maintain
The current pace you're on.
the current pace, which is very, very hard. And then I also know what I need to do if I'm not on track, what I need to do differently. So whether it's take more risk or explore different areas. So obviously there's stuff me and you are talking about at the minute, Charlie, for example, where that will play a massive factor. So like I said, I've got plan A, B, C that I know if A doesn't work, B will probably take me to 100 mil, C will take me to 100 mil within X time frame, right? But I also have like D, E, and F. And I know the ones that if I manage to get there, how I can leverage to get to being a billionaire. But I'm not saying necessarily we'll do it, but where I couldn't see it a few years ago, like I had no clue and I thought it was probably impossible.
It's now on the horizon.
It's not a limiting belief now.
Yeah.
I know it's absolutely possible. I know people who are doing it. I know how they're doing it. And I can see the trends with how people are doing it. So again, me and you had a conversation in the last few weeks, right, about a certain way to kind of really build wealth in a more, should we say, smarter way, right? Not in a kind of traditional sense. And that's a common theme, going down certain routes. I could talk quite openly about this, private equity, SaaS routes. There's a number of routes which are quite common where people have managed to go from X mil net worth to hitting the 100 billionaire status. You can't do it working a day job, obviously.
No, and this is, I came up with some bullshit term. I spoke on the podcast earlier about this when we filmed a YouTube video yesterday, and I call it's like the turbocharge effect. When you've done a business for a while and you've accumulated some success, stuff will just gravitationally kind of get pulled to you. It's like you're like the Death Star in Star Wars, like pulling things in, because stuff will just kind of get offered to you and you're a good fit to kind of help get this thing where it needs to be. And then if it works, you're going to walk away with like multiple 7 figures potentially. Where it's become so much more simple, right, is if you become like a man of value and of use to people around you, you don't think about the money. Money is a byproduct, right, of the right habits, the right kind of like building your skill set, investing in yourself. So you've developed a very strong skill set in certain things, right, Charlie, over your time doing this. You've then put yourself in the position where when the right opportunities come up and you're in the right network, that you can take advantage of them. Sadly, people don't get that sometimes. So sometimes you might feel like 1 year you're not making a lot of progress, but then you'll be like, boom, this opportunity's come up. I have the skill set. I have the money to get involved in this. And it's like the stars align, but you've created or put yourself in that position to get there. It's a bit like when Dubai came up, and we set up the office here 2 years ago. If I'd not reinvested in the business, didn't have the resources, the team in the UK, the money to do it, I wasn't one of the top wealth managers back home, I wouldn't have had the opportunity, but I got myself in a position to take advantage of it. Then I've come over here and then I've done the same again here. I've built an incredible network. I work with some amazing people. I try and help everyone genuinely. Like I try and add value, try and upskill myself all the time and get better and be a better person as well as
in the areas I can give advice and offer skills. And then that's, I think, how you keep getting to the next level. It's almost like don't let the tail wag the dog, you know, just try and add value to everyone you meet, and naturally kind of they'll have that trickle effect.
Well, I think it's almost like the world has a funny karma effect that things then just come back to you naturally. Absolutely. And also like people, like I introduced you to someone the other day who he literally messaged me like the day after we met being like, oh, I've got like 200 grand, what should I invest in? I was like, oh, I'll speak to Dan. Like, it's just funny how things kind of work. And I think people need to have more of that intention, also looking to help people, introduce people to the right people, because people solve problems, and you to get the success you want in life is ultimately determined by the people you know and the relationship you have.
Your reputation is everything, right? And like even in the last like few weeks of me being here, and obviously there's some stuff obviously Charlie we've talked about in the last week alone, you know, I went out my way to really help a few people, and like that's came back like tenfold in the space of like a matter of days, where this guy's been like, damn, you need to speak to this guy who runs this company because of XYZ. I get on the phone to this guy and we're like, click straight away, and we're like, oh my God, this is incredible. Like there's loads I can do for you. There's loads you can do for me. And the next thing we know, me and him were introducing each other to people in our network. And then long story short, something went out on social media and he was like, oh my God, do you know these people? And it all just started with one conversation with someone where we're trying to add value. And it's now this ripple effect where it's like 10, 20 people in the space of a matter of days this week. It's incredible. That's why, again, Dubai, people don't underestimate the environment is everything.
Well, it's just an accelerator. And I think I can appreciate why it's not for everyone, but then if you want to play this game and if you just want to play it for a short period of time, it's ultimately living in Dubai is an unfair advantage over the rest of the world right now in terms of economic growth.
Yeah, no, it is. It's almost like you said earlier. I feel like it's a bit of a cheat code being here, but I don't think it is for everyone. That's the thing. There's people who come here and I think they won't view it how me and you do. And there's nothing you can do when people have a certain mindset. And like, that's why I get frustrated sometimes when people try to talk negatively, not just about Dubai, it could be anything, you know, and you're like, just, if you don't want to be somewhere, you know, don't leave. Or if you don't like your job, leave. Or if you're moaning about your partner, don't be with him or her, right? It's just that it's a mentality thing. If you are the right person and you come here and you've come to Dubai to better yourself and you take full advantage of all the positives there are to be had to living in Dubai, you know, sun's out, tax-free, you know, clean, safe. Yeah, like the list literally goes on. And you embrace that, and you don't get, like, any country has its downsides, you know, no country is perfect, you know, and you don't get pulled into the materialistic part of Dubai. You don't hang around with the wrong people. You don't go to beach clubs every weekend, right? You're gonna reap the rewards. You know, I went for a meal with a bunch of lads last night, all super successful, like 7-8 figure entrepreneurs, right? There was not one person at the table drinking alcohol. You know, in the past I would have had a glass of wine maybe, but I didn't want to be the odd one out. You know, social pressure got to me, and that's had a really positive effect, right? It's good. You know, I'm glad I didn't drink, for example. And that's like a really tiny example of like the environment. There's no way that would happen in the UK. No. I'd never go out with like 8 of my friends back home and there wouldn't be one person not drinking. Yeah. It'd be everyone would be drinking, and probably way too much in some cases.
To wrap things up, you mentioned in terms of financial education, what are the best books you'd recommend for people after listening to this and also following you, they should listen to get or read? Or else if anyone wants to hack, if you want to learn how to learn really quickly, is if you listen to the audiobook and you read at the same time, you take information twice as fast. Yeah, I've heard that. What are the best books you'd recommend?
I'd have to give this some thought, because what's really difficult about my industry is there's more technical books.
Probably more like a broad mentality of relationship. Like for me, there's a book, Psychology of Money, is a very good book. That's
one of the most popular ones, I think, in the last few years. That is a really good book, and that has actually helped some clients of mine. But the only problem is there's a lot of context left out of that book. So the suggestion in that book is going into index funds is potentially a good option. What that book completely misses out, I don't believe there's even a section on it where it really explains the value of taking advice. And for me, that's like a massive bugbear, because I know all I know the impact of having so many people's lives over 15 years. We've completely transformed it. And it's nothing to do with performance. It's nothing to do with indexes or trackers. It's to do with actual proper financial advice to do with their money. So that book's a great book for some general principles, but it just misses out kind of the general kind of, it misses out like a massive, it's like you giving people advice on their training and not telling them about their diet. you'd be like, you can get on the treadmill as much as you like. If you go home and smash a load of burgers, you're not going to be where you want to be, right? That is a bit like that book. So that book's a good start. The Richest Man in Babylon is like
I think it's like is that Robin Sharma?
I can't remember now, but it's like a parable, but it illustrates some really good points. Any of Warren Buffett's books are typically quite good because they are fundamental, like ground rules to investing. And I think that one of his books is actually called The Ground Rules, which is really good. And it talks about how he formed Berkshire Hathaway, the partnership originally, and the principles he used to set his investors. So he'd literally say, like, these are how things work. You either invest under these terms, you don't. And that's how he protected them. I sadly can't do that. Where, like, for example, he'd say, you know, like, you can't judge performance over 3 or 5 years. You've got to give me more time, because I might go into these companies and in the first year or two, it might not look where they should be. But the point is, I bought them at a discount. They might take a year or two to recover. You need to give me time. So he wouldn't take on investors unless they were long-term focused, right? But his principles, a lot of them still stand very true to today. So any of his books is really good. And then there's a guy called Howard Marks, top fund manager. He's got a great book on like market cycles. He's got a lot of great books, but there's a really good one on market cycles, and it's quite an easy read for like a normal person who's not in the industry. And I think that's a really, really good book. There is some books on why, by the way, taking financial advice is worthwhile. So there's some advisors who have done books and they kind of try and explain the value of advice, but the best ones on that, and that is probably the best, this is actually probably the best read I could advise anyone read, is read the industry publications on the value of advice, like Vanguard's Advisor Alpha, because it explains why someone should actually seek advice, and it's talked about general principles of investing as opposed to getting caught up on investing in an index or whatever. And that is such a short read. I mean, that's like a 10-15 minute.
Cool. Some great advice to finish up on. Everyone, make sure you go follow Dan, check him out, and hit him up if he needs any help. And if you need help in terms of investing in wealth and planning money, I can highly recommend him. If you took value from the podcast, make sure you subscribe, share it with a friend, and we'll see you in the next episode. It's on screen right now.